You know exactly what to do. You have the plan, the skill, the time, and you're not doing it. Every productivity system that you've tried has eventually failed, and you've decided that the problem is discipline. Procrastination has almost nothing to do with discipline, which is why discipline never fixes it. I'm going to show you what procrastination actually is, why it is almost never an information or a willpower problem, and where the real cause lives. By the end of this, you will stop trying to fix it with another app or another system, and you'll know how to actually address the thing that's generating it. Here is the first thing to understand. Procrastination is not laziness. That's what I called it for years, but the people who procrastinate the most are often the most capable, the most ambitious, and the ones with the highest standards, amusingly. Lazy people don't lie awake feeling guilty about what they didn't do. Procrastinators do, constantly. The guilt is evidence that they care, so whatever's stopping them isn't a lack of caring. If you genuinely didn't care, you wouldn't procrastinate, you just do it. The fact that you keep circling the task, avoiding it, and then feeling terrible about avoiding it tells you that the task does matter to you, which means there's something else in the way. Most people treat the gap between knowing and doing as an information problem. They think that if they just had a better system or a clearer plan or more discipline or whatever, they'd finally execute. So they buy another course, they download another app, they read another book on productivity, but it never works because the gap was never logical, it was emotional. You're not avoiding the task, you're avoiding the feeling that the task triggers, and unfortunately, until you address that feeling, there is no system on the planet that will get you to do the thing, because every system is operating at the level of behavior while your block is actually at the level of emotion. When you look closely, procrastination is almost always avoidance of one of a few specific feelings. Sometimes it's the fear of failure. If you don't start, you can't fail. As long as the project lives in your head, it's still perfect and you're still capable. But the moment that you start, you risk producing something that proves you're not as good as you hoped. So you keep it in this realm of who knows, of potential, where it can't disappoint you. Sometimes it's the fear of judgment. Putting the work out means people can evaluate it, and evaluation means exposure. There is a quote that captures this perfectly. In these environments, weakness gets exploited. It is blood in the water, and if part of you believes that visible imperfection will be punished, you'll avoid producing anything visible. That is one of the things that stopped me from writing my book that I eventually published last year. Sometimes it is the fear of success, and this one I know sounds strange, but it is actually really common. If you finish the thing and it works, well, now the stakes go up. Now there are expectations of you. Now you have a higher position to maintain and even further to fall. And a part of you wants the win, and a part of you is terrified of it. So you stall right at the edge. And sometimes the task itself carries an association. Somewhere along the way, this kind of work got linked to a feeling of inadequacy. And now every time you approach it, your body braces for that feeling before you've actually done anything. There is a linguistic layer here too. The way that you talk to yourself about the task pre-programs your response to it. When you label something as hard, your body physically prepares for the resistance before you started. The word itself induces tension. You have told your nervous system that what is coming is going to be a struggle, so it tenses up, it braces, it looks for a reason to delay the difficulty. And when you catch yourself thinking, this is going to be hard, that isn't a neutral description, it is a command that makes the task harder than it actually is. And part of breaking that procrastination is catching the language and then questioning it. Asking, what if this were easy? Yeah, it doesn't make the task disappear, it doesn't make it miraculously overnight so easy that you don't even have to think about doing it, but it does remove the self-imposed friction that you've been stacking on top of it. There is one more pattern that drives procrastination, and it is an amusingly sneaky one. People lump every part of a task into one overwhelming mass, and then that mass is so big that inaction feels reasonable, it feels justified. I need to launch a business is not a task, that is 1,000 tasks, all dressed up to look like one task. And when you look at the whole thing, it is so unbelievably heavy that the rational response is not to start. The overwhelm becomes the excuse for not doing. The antidote to this, unsurprisingly, is specificity. Not launch the business, but write the first 3 lines of a landing page. Not fix your finances, but open the spreadsheet and start to write out what you spend money on. When you break the mass down into a single specific action, the emotional charge of it drops out because a small specific thing doesn't trigger the same threat response as an enormous vague one. The ancient version of this is the Gordian knot, a problem that was so tangled and so stressful that everyone assumed that it couldn't be solved until someone stopped trying to work through the complexity and just cut straight through it. Most of what feels like an unsolvable mass is actually a few specific actions hiding behind a single label that feels very overwhelming. This is the reason every productivity system eventually collapses. The systems are behavioral. They tell you what to do and how to structure your time, but the procrastination isn't a structure problem. It's a fear problem. It's a language problem. It's an overwhelm problem, all of which live underneath the behavior. You can white knuckle a new system for a few weeks through sheer force. I agree. But the underlying feeling is still there. It is still firing every time you approach the task, and eventually, willpower runs out and you revert back to doing the same old thing. You blame yourself, you call yourself undisciplined, and then you go looking for the next system. And the cycle repeats because you keep treating the symptom. When you catch yourself procrastinating, stop trying to force the action and just get really curious about the feeling that's led you there. Ask, what am I afraid of? What feeling does this task trigger? Usually it's a fear of failing or a fear of, what success would actually cost, or the old association of inadequacy. And naming it takes some of its power away, right? Because a named fear can be examined and a vague one that you don't really know what it is can't. Then you trace the belief underneath it. If the fear is failure, the belief is often my worth depends on this going well. If the fear is judgment, it could be that if people see my flaws, they'll reject me. These are identity level beliefs, and they're the actual cause, not you're lazy. If you address the belief, the procrastination loses its fuel. And then you have to make the task smaller. Cut the overwhelming mass into one specific action that is small enough that your threat response doesn't immediately panic. And then go do that one thing. Momentum is built from a single specific action, not bursts of motivation. And most importantly, watch your language. Catch every time you say the word hard. Question it. Remove the friction you've been adding with your own internal narrative. Procrastination is not a character flaw, it is a protective mechanism. Part of you is trying to keep you safe from a feeling, and it is using the avoidance as a tool. The avoidance looks like a discipline failure, but it is actually oftentimes a fear of succeeding. Once you see it that way, you will stop fighting yourself and start understanding yourself. You stop reaching for the next app and you start addressing the belief underneath it, and the action that you've avoided for weeks suddenly becomes possible. Not because you found more willpower, but because you removed the fear that was generating the resistance. You were never lazy. You were protecting yourself from a feeling. And the moment that you face the feeling, the procrastination has nothing left to do. It ceases to function. The fear underneath your procrastination lives at the identity level, which is why no productivity system has ever fixed it for any meaningful amount of time. Watch my video on the 3 levels of choice to understand why behavioral solutions can't touch identity problems and where the real change actually happens.